And welcome everybody to the Wealthy Ironworker podcast. This is going to be episode number 6, where we dive into the all-important question of, do you need to go to college to get a good job? Caveat right out of the gate, I am not anti-higher education or anti-college, but I am you have to go to college to get a good job. Come on into the studio, let's have a discussion. So today's podcast episode is we're gonna deviate from the norm. The main thing, if you're watching this, is that you'll see that I'm not necessarily in the studio per se, and that's because I'm on the road this week and I am doing this from the hotel room. But I've got this itch that I need to scratch, and I want to talk about the next podcast episode. And so I want to start off with a good question. One that I've been asking for a long time now, and I've given, bits of advice to numerous people. And it's this. The question goes, do you need to go to college to get a good job? And anybody that can look back at their own educational endeavors, right? You go through what I would say is government mandated school, K through 12. And what you likely heard in the educational sector from guidance counselors, teachers, principals, all those people, well-intentioned or not. And then you take your own family members and society as a whole, and they say, you got to go to college to get a good job. I know it's been out there for at least 4 decades. And I heard it my own self probably for at least 25 years. I know that it's still talking point today, and it was a talking point when I was in high school for sure, and I heard it was a routine thing. It's a common occurrence. The guidance counselor or teachers or whatnot ask you what it is that you want to do for a living, and then they take your answer and then they run with it and say, okay, well, let's look at, by default, let's look at a college program that will augment or help you achieve whatever it is you say you want to do. Now, I've already, in the previous episode, passion versus opportunity, which is one of the, favorite top talking points of mine. I've already dismissed that as a way that we shouldn't be looking at things. We should not sit here and ask young people, well, what is it that you want to do, and leave it at that. We do them no favors whatsoever. Instead, we ought to prime the pump a little bit and say, okay, what is it you want to do for a living? And then say, is there an opportunity to do that? And within that opportunity, can it support you? And, your future family endeavors, lifestyle, etc., right? And for those of you who are number crunchers or whatnot, you can go and read. It's called Reverse Budgeting. It's part of the budgeting series that I did. And the basic gist of reverse, the basic gist of reverse budgeting is that you take where you're going to end up at and back it up. So you go, okay, well, this is the lifestyle that I quote unquote want to live. And you start plugging those numbers into the spreadsheet that's already listed on the website, because it tells you that I get it from, I forget, it's somewhere, it's a .gov website. The link is in the actual article. But in a gist, you can say, okay, well, how is it that you want to live? Like, what kind of house do you want? Okay, well, this is what the mortgage is going to look like. This is what we estimate your power bill is going to look like. This is what we estimate all of these bills, and it'll build you basically based upon what you want. It's going to tell you, okay, well, here's how much money you need to earn to live like that. Well, how do I earn that kind of money? And really what it does is it's very eye-opening. So if you're dealing with a younger person, or you're a young person yourself, and you're looking at, okay, well, what kind of careers can I consider or potentially consider? Think about the kind of lifestyle you want, right? It's like Stephen Covey says, when you begin with the end in mind, and that's the kind of mantra for reverse budgeting, because I want to build on this case to pursue opportunity. But I've already dealt with opportunity. I've already talked about it at least. We'll talk about it some more. But from a podcast episode, I've talked about that. So now the likely outcome is we need to have the next question is, okay, well, because you're pursuing opportunity, well, where does it happen to be at? A lot of people, we need to, kind of put to death this notion that, okay, well, I got to go to college to get a good job. So if you came to me today and you said, I'm looking for some career advice. And this is, young people, pay attention, because this is what you should want to do. Outside of checking the various bits of information that you can find with the computer in your hand, you should also be talking to older people and saying, hey, can I pick your brain for a second? I'd like to know what your thoughts are. And don't just ask one person, ask multiple people and say, hey, I'm looking for a career. And I'm hearing from those in the educational system, presumably I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt and say that because they came through this system, it tells them, okay, well, this is the way that I went to make my career. Therefore, this is what everybody else must do to make their career. Should I go then to college to get a good job? And if you came to me and you asked me this question, I'm going to ask you, do you know what you want to do for a living? Because I want to build that case for opportunity. It's all tied in together. And so if you said to me, no, I don't know what I want to do for a living, then I would say it's a waste of your time to go to college. It is a waste. And not only is it a waste, but you are accruing college debt that you cannot claim bankruptcy on. However, on the flip side, if you came to me and you said, I have wanted to be an attorney for a long time, or I have wanted to be a nurse, or I have wanted to be a doctor, the three that pop into mind currently while I'm doing this podcast episode, that clearly have a higher educational track to them, then I would say, yes, you're going to have to go to college, because that is the prescribed route. That's the starter pack for those specific degrees. But if you and I don't want to tip my hat too much for the next episode, but if you told me you didn't know what you wanted to do, I'd tell you you're wasting your time going to college. Instead, go jump into the workforce. And so if you don't know what you want to do for a living, then this is a non-starter. I can definitely tell you that you don't need college to get a good job. But I want to talk over a few data points that I pulled. I did a little bit of research. I do have an article on the website, and I do have some data articles that I reference. But I started to do a little bit more data mining prior to me coming on here, because I wanted to talk about numbers, and I wanted to paint some pictures from numbers. And then I also want to talk about a few different experiential data points. I've got one in particular from an apprentice that was in an apprentice class. And then I've got a couple more that I was scrolling through social media, and I found a couple that I thought, okay, well, one of them I had heard before, the other one I hadn't. But I thought both of these are very well oriented to kind of put a little bit more information out there for those of you who might be seriously considering this life-altering decision. And what I mean by life-altering is that you can take on enormous amounts of debt at ridiculous interest rates to pursue education that may not, in the long run, pay any dividends for you at all. But you can't get $5,000 loan for a small business. So it's an enormous decision. And we think that people at age of 18, 19, you have this head on your shoulders and you're not in the clouds, and that you can make these life-altering decisions. And what we've got then is a whole generation of millennials, especially younger millennials, that are saddled with enormous amounts of debt that don't, unless they either A, run into money somehow, some way, B, really bite down on the bullet to change their lifestyle to save and pay off debt, or C, experience some form of loan cancellation and forgiveness, they'll never come out from underneath it. It's enormous. So let's look at some statistical data points that I want to kind of articulate, okay? Now, from master degree, I was looking this up, and you can just a quick Google search. I wanted to know the total number of Americans that have college degrees, and I wanted to compare this number. So I wanted to go back to 1970, and I've done that before in previous exercises, but in this one here, they only went back to 1986, and they ended in 2016. So I got a 30-year time period. That's enough for me. It doesn't quite get me to the threshold where I want it to go, but it's going to help get me to the data points that I really want to drive out. So in 1986, 19.4% of Americans, 0.4% of 240 million Americans had college degrees. When you do the math, that's about 46.5 million Americans had college degrees. Now, when you fast forward to 2016, 33.4% of Americans had college degrees. And you would think, okay, well, 19.4 to 33.4 is not that big of a leap. But our population didn't stay stagnant. We went from, in those 30 years, we went from 240 million to 323 million. So that's an increase in 83 million Americans in the 30-year time period. So what, and that's 107. So total number at the 2016 threshold, that's 107, almost 108 million Americans had college degrees. And so when you look at the data, you've got an increase of 83 million during that time period. And you have an increase of 61 million in college degrees. That's an enormous number. That's a huge number. And I had the data points in the office at the studio, but I don't have them here for the increase in tuition. But it's like, I don't know, it's an enormous amount of money that, like, from, like, let's say 1970, for example, to 2020. The I think it's 50 years. I think they marked 50 years of, they were tracking things. Like, the housing market is ridiculous from 1970 to now. And it's no wonder that older generations, that we look at these younger people and they go, well, no, why can't they afford a house? Well, the housing market is ridiculous. You could do one, income back in 1970. It's almost impossible to do it now without making serious life choices, which I have done. And I know this because I'm doing it myself. And then on top of that, on top of having to make those significant life choices, the majority of these people who followed the advice of well-intentioned or not older people and those in academia pursuing college, going to, go to college, get a good job like they've been told, have student loan debt to pay back, and they can't seem to make any headway with it. And when you consider that someone as conservative as Dave Ramsey, and if you don't know who Dave Ramsey is, then you need to look him up. The man makes an enormous amount of money selling common sense in a lot of ways. And he's a very smart guy, just trying to help a lot of people with some common sense stuff. Even Dave Ramsey is not necessarily opposed. When I found this out, I was pretty flabbergasted. Even Dave Ramsey is not directly opposed to student loan forgiveness. The problem that I've heard he has anyway is these predatory loan and college/universities that specifically targeted, and they have it on tape from what I'm told, they have it on tape that they specifically targeted certain demographics and individuals like veterans and whatnot, because these are the people who we know are going to pay for our massive increase in tuition. I don't have that tuition number data, like how much has increased, but it's been an enormous amount. That blows my mind. And so when we look at younger people and we go, we look at them, especially baby boomers, we look at them in our lens, and I'm saying our because I'm, like late Gen X, early millennial. And we look at them through our lens, through the Gen X lens, through the baby boomer lens, through our opportunity lens, through the world that we live in, and we don't take into the account the various statistical anomalies in a lot of ways that are really unique to the younger millennials. All of these things have kind of come together to create this perfect storm of, well, we're going to sacrifice the millennials on the altar of, I don't even know what the altar is going to be, what we would call it, but they have been sacrificed. They hold an enormous amount of the 1.7 trillion with a T college degree debt. It's astronomical. And it's amazing to me that we don't take that in consideration. And on the article that I referenced a PBS article. On the article, do you need college to get a good job? I initially wrote it back in, I think it was 2022, and I updated it for last year. I need to update it for this year. And maybe I will take that PBS article out. But that PBS article, when I first found it, was written in 2014. And it was referencing, it took kind of stock in an argument against the BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, saying that the BLS had said only 27% of the jobs are estimating to need a college degree. And it took stock with that. It had a problem with that and started picking that apart. But the point that I want to make when it comes to college tuition, I want to bring out, I think I mentioned this. I might have mentioned it last episode or the one before, but there's a really good book called Higher Education, and the author is Andrew Hacker, and his wife, I believe, is Claudia. I forget her last name, but they co-wrote it. And the guy, he's probably like 98 or something like that. He's an old cat. And he picked apart higher education. Now, he's very pro higher education in the classical sense. And let me explain what the classical sense was. You would go to a university and you'd go to a liberal arts college to get a liberal arts degree. And the main purpose behind the whole ordeal, right, was to broaden your thinking and to stretch your critical thinking skills. And if you want any indication, and I might have even touched on this in a previous podcast episode, but if you want any indication that colleges and universities are seeing a swing, a trend away from their how would I say this? Away from their BS degree system, and they're trying to capture the market of what they see. They're reading tea leaves. You see all these more emphasis put on vocational programs. Now, what I would argue, of course, is to, hit the contact page, send me some information. I'll get you plugged into whatever trade that you're looking to get into. I'll get you plugged into a registered apprenticeship program and get you where you're going to get paid to learn. Instead of paying someone else to teach you, I'm going to get you plugged into an apprenticeship program where you get paid to learn. And you're going to go on the job, and the educational quality will be vastly superior. So go to that contact page if that's you and hit me up. But you can see colleges and universities starting to try and adopt the vocational programs and whatnot. Now, for most of us, we know intuitively we know at least some of the degrees, that are out there in the higher educational system. And many of us think, okay, well, if you're going to be a psychologist, well, then you ought to study psychology. And if you are going to be a lawyer, then you need to study history. And we would probably be spot on. But in that book, Andrew Hacker discusses where someone who studies liberal arts can learn an enormous amount of various jobs. He also talks about in his other book, which is really stellar. I read it twice back to back because I liked it that much. It's called The Math Myth and Other STEM Delusions. And in it, he starts picking apart people who put an overemphasis on like STEM degrees and mathematics degrees in particular for jobs that have nothing to do with any of that. And they use those degrees as a filter, as a way to weed people out. And he had interactions, and he was talking and interviewing different other professors, as a matter of fact, who would talk to people and go, well, we want to talk to your mathematic, students for these potential jobs, one in particular. And he asked them, he said, well, why do you want to talk to these mathematical graduates? What part of the job is mathematical? And the word that he used was sheepish. They sheepishly replied, none. And they said it makes us easier to filter people that we don't want to interview out. So, because what you've had happen, okay? So this is another deep dive, and I don't have the data for this, but this is intuitively true. when you had companies that you would go, like, it goes back to the Gen X stuff, goes back to, I think it was episode 3 or 4 actually, where as a baby boomer entering in, you go to work and you go to work for somebody for 40 years. Okay. Well, the company would view you as an asset and an investment. As a matter of fact, they wanted to keep you around, so invest into you, and they would pour into you, and you were just another investment for them, right? A human resource is the most valuable resource you've got, and so they're going to invest in you. Well, at some point in time, we decided, okay, well, we're going to get away from that particular model, and I want to dump more of the responsibility and training onto people coming into the workforce. And they licked their chops and said, okay, well, the college education system, that's going to be the way to go. I'm going to use that as the filter process. I'm going to get all the training that I needed, and you're going to come into, work for me, and you're going to have everything you needed. Well, what they found out over the course of many, many years is that it's a lie. And it's a gamble that did not pay off for them. And so what happens is you get all these individuals that graduate from a college that have been told, you got to go to college, you get a good job. When you get done, you'll make all this money. Then they get out and they're very disillusioned. You see all these young people making these TikTok videos, and there's a lot of older people who are making fun of them. And some of them deserve to be made fun of, but some of them don't. And one of the reasons why is we don't take the totality of all the economic situations and everything. And someone, would rightly say, oh, well, no one made you go to college. And that's certainly true too. But from a cultural perspective, we have sold this narrative, and we've sold an entire generation down the river on this narrative. And so it's no surprise to me anyway, when they come out disillusioned. And so all these companies, these people are coming out and they're doing exactly what they've been told from well-intentioned and not parents and educational system people and whatnot. They get out here and they're going, this isn't making anything happen. So what's ultimately finding out, and it's very telling to me because I can remember being at nuclear power plants and whatnot, and the people who were running some of the bigger departments didn't even have a high school education. They had experience, and they were in charge of people who had high school diplomas, and they were in charge of people who had college degrees. You see, we have a significant problem in this country where we value credentials over experience, and it has done a lot of damage to not just the workforce in general, but it's done a lot of damage to the product. And if you want any indication at all, and if you're not in the construction industry, then this may be a little harder for you to understand. But if you are, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I have seen companies, they'll go, okay, well, I want you to have a master's degree. I want you to come in here and have this credential and that. If you're in the safety world, I want you to have a certified safety professional, a CSP. If you're a welder, I want you to be certified. Pick your particular cert. Doesn't matter to me. But when you see all this experience, when you see that guy that's 65 years old and he's getting ready to retire, and the company offers him an enormous amount of money to stay, it's not because he has credentials. It's because he has experience, and they're trying to stave off change for as long as they can. And until they can do that, it's a very clear indicator that they value experience, over credentials and education, because experience is education. You learn so much more on the job through experience than you do from credentials and through, real world. And if you want any other indication, I was talking with a student. It was an adult student, and we were talking about the business world. Now, the MBA is the most ubiquitous degree out there. Ubiquitous means it's the most out there. I don't know the numbers, but it is the most sought after degree. And it's just ridiculous how many people are pursuing MBAs. The main problem with MBAs is that most, I can't say that I've surveyed all of them, but an enormous number of MBAs are taught by academics and not business owners, not former business owners or current business owners who tell a completely different story than academics do. That's a significant problem too, because we're valuing credentials and education over experience. And experience wins out every single time. Now, I said earlier at the beginning of this podcast episode that I wanted to transfer into some experiential data. I'll give you 3 main talking points. Number 1, I will never forget. So I've been an apprentice instructor for many years now, and this was probably about 7 years ago or so. I had a bunch of apprentices in there, early to mid 20s. So they would be early 30s now. And there was one guy in particular. He was a very brilliant guy, but he was an apprentice, a first-year apprentice, just like everybody else. The only difference was he had $80,000 worth of college tuition debt hanging around his neck. And now he was starting off on the same foot as everybody else, starting into the career field. He just had an $80,000 albatross around his neck. Now, he has since gone on to be to greener pastures, if you will. He did a couple of other endeavors that took him in a different direction, and I applaud him for it. And hopefully, he gets all that paid off. But it's an enormous amount of debt hanging around your neck. Okay. The second thing is, and I was looking for this a while back, and I finally stumbled across it again. There's a video, and I won't link it in this. Maybe I'll link it in Spotify. I need to look at how I can do that. I definitely can link it in the comment section of YouTube and Rumble. There was a young girl. She is doing, I don't think it might be a TikTok. I think it is a TikTok. I'm not sure. She talks about how she's got a master's degree. And she says, I'm an educated woman. I've got a master's degree. I'm doing my thing. And she goes, my husband did not go to college. He did not choose to go to college. He chose to go into trades, which, by the way, I'm telling you now, this is a caveat. If you want to go into the trades, go to the contact page on the website, hit the form, fill it out. I'll get you in touch with whoever you need to. There's so much opportunity. But she says, my husband did not go into higher education. He went into the trades, which I would argue, again, that the trades are a form of higher education because I'm learning a skill. Multiple ones, as a matter of fact. She goes, he's been doing it for, I think, 7 or 8 years. Like I said, I'll link the video in the description. She goes, by mid-year, he will have earned twice. He will have brought home. Now, let me make sure that's clear. She says he will, by the middle of the year, he will have brought home in net pay more than my gross for the year. And I have a master's degree. By the end of the year, because he works shutdowns, he worked time and a half and double on the Sundays, she goes, he will have quadrupled, which is 4 times what I make. And she says, I have a master's and I have student debt that I need to pay off. And she's like, we don't talk about this enough. This isn't talked about enough. The sheer, and what she's really highlighting is twofold. Number one, this is one of the reasons this podcast has actually got started. I want to talk about a lot of topics that are very pro-skilled trades. And there's a multitude of topics that are applicable all across all boards. And the sheer amount of opportunity in the trades is point number one that she's making. And point number two that she's inadvertently making is that it's not worth it going to college. It's not worth it. Unless you told me or someone else that your career that you want to do, and there's plenty of opportunity, necessitated that you go to college, nursing, lawyer, doctor, etc., engineer, then I would tell you, don't waste your time. Go get experience. That's what you want. And the third one that I was watching, it was earlier today, as a matter of fact. I'll try and remember to link that one as well. It was a reaction video, but the girl was saying, I logged into my student loan dashboard, I guess. And she said something to the effect of, I needed to get the information to somebody else, whatever. She goes, I started looking at what I paid in 10 years, in a 10-year time period. She goes, I owed $80,000. And I've been paying a little bit here, a little bit there. Like I said, I paid listen to me, I paid $6,000 in lump sum last year because that's the only significant way to reduce the amount of money. And she said, I was owed $80,000. Now I owe $76,000. And in 10 years, I've paid $120,000. And she says, how the is this possible? How the hell is this possible? It's modern day economic slavery is what it is. And what's worse is that the product, even since 1986, which is the data point that I initially used in my research, the product has been cheapened. And we talked about that as well, but I'll touch on it here. The vast majority of individuals reside right in the center of the bell curve for intelligence. It's just what it is. And you've got some people, when you're, depending on which way you're looking at this, if you're watching me, but if you're looking at a piece of paper in front of you, you have fewer people to the left with less intelligence, and you have fewer people to the right with more intelligence. And I don't have it in front of me. If I can find it, it might even be on one of the articles. But there's an overlap with the general population and the way that the bell curve works for those pursuing higher education. If you want to align or more closely align the two different bell curves, there's two things you can do. It's only one of two things. Number one, you can greatly increase or try to increase the intelligence level of more people in the population. Well, I don't know if anybody's been paying attention to public school endeavors, but I don't necessarily think that's the case. Or number two, you can cheapen the educational quality to allow for the massive influx of individuals into the college degree arena. It's one of two ways. That's all you can do. And that's it. And so what has happened then is that you are paying enormously more money for a product that is worth less. And that's the point. And the last point that I'll make about this whole dilemma here, this whole dynamic in this discussion point is this. The number of people, the number of degrees, again, it's the same point. The number of degrees that are needed for jobs. It doesn't matter what you go. If you go out and you're doing an engineer's job or you're doing a doctor's job or whatever, you need a job. You need that higher educational track, so you need a degree. But the number of degrees that quote unquote we need out into the workforce has been vastly overinflated. Now, if you want to go to college because you like to learn, you're going to get out of it what you put into it for the most part. The product is still kind of cheap, but it depends on where you're going to go. Cheap end, not cheap, but it's cheap end. You're going to pay more for a cheaper product as far as educational quality goes. But if you want to learn, depending on what you want to learn, you can learn if you like learning. But overall, to adopt just blindly that I need to go to college to get a good job, nope, you don't. Not at all. So take that into consideration. For you young people, if you are serious, you're getting ready to enter into the workforce and you're serious about your educational endeavors or your career pursuits, you can go to the contact page. You can hit me up. I've diverted multiple people during the website only time frame into various fields, depending upon what their interests were, electricians and pipe fitters and the like. I would love to introduce some of y'all into the ironworking field. I'm telling you right now, it's a good career. And if you do it right, it can be very fulfilling too. Secondly, for those of you who have other people within your realm of influence, seriously consider the direction that you're about to send them people and the advice that you're about to send those people. Don't give them false hope. An entire generation has bit off this. And it wasn't because they were sold a bill of goods is really what it boils down to. And now they're economic slaves. They're economic slaves. That's all they really are, to be blunt. And if you can't see that, it's because there are multiple angles. There's opportunity that wasn't around. There are inflationary things that are taking place. I mean, housing costs are ridiculous. Wages, you can look at the productivity where from 1970 onward, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about from 1970, because 1970 onward, you can see wages kind of flatlining out while productivity skyrockets in comparison. So we have some serious issues to talk about. The last thing that I would want to do to a young person that I actually cared for is to send them down this trajectory without some serious and robust discourse. Do your homework. Don't fall for the lie that you got to go to college and get a good job. All right. Well, podcast over. This is Wealthy Ironworker. Thank you for listening. Tune in for the next one and look for those 2 TikTok videos in the description.